I've been getting a lot of questions about the PlayStation 5 Pro and whether or not I'm buying it. The quick answer is no. The short answer is hell no. And yes, those are back to front. My current PS5 is more than capable of playing last generation games, but with a white label on them. Like, why do we need a PS4 Pro? Like, at this point, until they leave the old generation behind and accept that, people ain't moving and just make more games for the current generation, it ain't going to happen. And this is an interesting one because a lot of you guys know that I make videos on TikTok too. And over there, because of them generally being a younger audience, a lot of them now can no longer remember just how many good games used to come out on a yearly basis. Between like 2006 until about 2014, we would get so many Game of the Year contenders every single year. Now it's like, well, now it's like it is now. Not to mention the fact that if I were to get a PlayStation 5 Pro, I'd also have to buy a disc drive to attach to it to be able to use any of the games that I'm currently using. Considering the fact that Sony is absolutely having a problem with getting people from the PlayStation 4 over to the PlayStation 5 in the first place, I don't understand the logic behind continually releasing new revisions of the PlayStation 5. At this point, the PS5 has got nearly as many PlayStation revisions as it does first-party games solely released for the PlayStation 5 that are not a remake or remaster in some way. Like, come on. Like, I've absolutely always been a little bit of a PlayStation fanboy. Like, in this shot right now, if you look hard enough, you can see a PlayStation from every single generation. But until... there is just no need for a PlayStation 5. The price is crazy. The functionality is pointless. The fact that you've got to buy extras for it to work in the same capacity as what we already have is insane. And there's just no need for it based upon the current library of games. If anything, in a few years' time, it could be a good shout when there is more stuff to play on the platform, perhaps. But at that point, when are we going to PS6? Because, PS5 is 4 years old, I want to say, at this point. By 4 years into the PlayStation 4, we had had some crazy games. Meanwhile, I don't know about you guys, but it still kind of feels to me like we're just beginning the generation of the PlayStation 5 and the Series X. I don't even feel like the Series X is fighting this battle anymore. They're just more of a media machine that's sort of retired from caring about, being the greatest console ever. But the PlayStation 5, they keep coming out with new revisions and not games. And I don't get it. Like, I love some of the remakes and remasters we've gotten, but I have to agree with the people that says we should probably be focusing on new stuff, because we're not getting new stuff very frequently anymore. In fact, let me put it across to you guys. How many of you are still on PlayStation 4? Because Sony knows full well that a massive portion of their fan base hasn't moved up to a base PS5 yet, let alone the Slim, let alone the revisions, and definitely not the Pro. And considering that you have to buy an expansion for the PS5 Pro to be capable of playing games in the first place, I would hazard a guess that a decent portion of the people that have not moved up from PS4 Pro or from PS4 in general, are unlikely to want to do that, given the fact that their discs won't just be put-inable. And yeah, I'm sure that a great percentage of their games are digital for sure, because that's the world we live in now. But still, what logical person that can't justify the price of a base PS5 in the last 4 years that is being on a PS4 is going to go, yeah, I'll pay whatever the current price is for the PS5 Pro to play the same games that I've already been playing. Like, we've done this before in my videos where we go through my PS5 shelf, and the majority of the games that are coming out today are still releasing with the PlayStation 4 version that is in mind. And when we do that, we objectively hamper the ability of the game to be at its best performance during the creation process. Like, if developers are having to make games with the previous generation hardware in mind, that is absolutely holding back what the console can do. If we look at like what the PS3 era and around then used to do, a PS2 version of a PS3 game would be an entirely, completely different game. Like, Web of Shadows on PS2 isn't Web of Shadows on PS3. The Star Wars Force Unleashed game is another great example, because the PS2 version of that was actually pretty good. Did you know that in the Star Wars Force Unleashed PS2 version, he holds his saber in a normal way rather than backhanded? Like, it's an entirely different game. And time spans and budgets and crunch and money making won't allow that sort of thing to happen anymore. But it's a case of we're now nearly 5 years into the generation. We are nearly, potentially, like almost halfway, if not more than halfway, through the lifespan of the PlayStation 5, and they still haven't managed to move people across, and we still haven't managed to leave the previous generation behind. Like, yeah, PS2 was getting games quite far into the PS3's life cycle, but typically if it was, they'd be different games entirely. and it would be sports games that, nobody cared about anyway. And the consoles, it wouldn't matter if the old consoles were still getting stuff if the new consoles were getting more stuff. But that's just not where we're at. Like, one of the biggest things for me when I was looking into the PlayStation 5 Pro was whether or not you'd have to still choose between performance and fidelity. Like, if they release the PlayStation 5 Pro and it absolutely can run 4K 60, sure, go for it. That is a good upgrade. But it can't. And yeah, because I don't even think, I'm not exactly a PC gamer here, so I could be talking out my ass with this one. But my PC behind me's got a 3080 Ti, and I don't know if I could do 4K 60 on brand new games on that. Old stuff, which is what I primarily play, I know that I can. But I would expect that of a 10-year-old game. But at this point, that's the thing, is we're still... The PlayStation 4 is 10 years old. So, like, when we release a game for the PlayStation 5 Pro that still has a version capable of being played on a PS4, it is being held back by decade-old hardware. I remember when I got a PS4 Pro, it wasn't because I needed the visual upgrade, nor did I really even notice one. It was because my original PS4 had decided to fly away. It had flown off into the clouds. You know how they all just sort of turn into jet engines and all that sort of thing. Guys, no way. So I didn't even actually remember how much the PlayStation 5 Pro cost, but I just gave it a Google. According to ChatGPT anyway, as a result of PlayStation Direct, the PS5 Pro is priced at $699.99, and that's excluding the disc drive, which is another £100. £800 for a PlayStation 5 Pro to play games that work just fine on a regular PlayStation 5, that are, in essence, games that work pretty much fine on a 10-year-old PlayStation 4, and Sony's wondering why they can't make people move. What? What do you mean? I've also seen that it comes with a 2TB SSD, which is a lovely upgrade for sure. It still doesn't really go that far when you consider the way that a lot of games handle their stuff now, like, how Call of Duty handles its weird interface, which, by the way, I don't like. I miss the days where every Call of Duty would have its own menus and fonts and things like that. Those were, that's a whole different topic, though. But sometimes I get questions because of how many games I play. Do I have external hard drives to have everything installed all at once? No. I have a few things that I leave installed all the time no matter what, so Borderlands and Dark Souls, because I come back to those. But everything else, because generally I only play it like once a year, maybe once every other year, I will delete it from my hard drive and reinstall it as and when. The Series X, I generally have to install less stuff too because I barely play it, but the PS5, I find myself deleting things and adding things near constantly. Yeah. This raises a question. For how much longer do we think we're going to get more console generations? Because there's a few different ways they could come at this. Because clearly they're having trouble getting people to move with the generations nowadays. And a lot of systems have moved to like service models where perhaps, obviously it can't work directly like this because of having actual hardware component like holdbacks. But again, they've not exactly been asked with that, considering they're still making games with 10-year-old hardware. But like the way that Call of Duty does things, where it's the same operating system and they just add a game to it every year now, I could see the consoles trying to do something like that in some way, somehow, perhaps, rather than continually releasing like every 8 years or so, PlayStation 6 and 7 and whatever. Because if they can't get people to move across, then the ability to make that big chunk of new money, is it there, And it's interesting because whenever you speak to people who talk about not buying a base model PS5, usually the holdback for them is the price. But at this point, 4 years in, I genuinely don't feel like that's very valid, because if you were somebody, right, for example, that was currently playing on PS4, and the only reason you've not moved up to a PlayStation 5 is you can't afford it, I believe that over a 4-year period you would have saved up the money to do that. It just simply isn't something that is worth it to you to actually make happen, because there are massive arguments to be made that there isn't that much of a difference, which is completely valid. I don't think the price is the valid concern. It's the value of that price that's the problem, because if you look at the previous console generations, they've never been cheap. Like, if you look at what the PS3 cost at release, that was nuts. The PS2 was pretty expensive. I think the PS4 was about $450, $500 if I remember correctly, because I think that I got back in day, they were about $700 for the pair of them, the Xbox One and PS4, I think. I think that the price could be a problem, like if it released today or tomorrow, you could use the price as a valid reason why you haven't done a thing. But in 4 years, you could have saved up whatever a PS5 costs, like what, 380 quid these days, I think they go for, ish. So you could have saved that in 4 years if it was something that you wanted to make happen. But I think that the reasons motivating somebody to want to make that happen are just simply not there at the minute, which is completely valid. So I'm curious, if you are one of the guys that is still on PS4 and hasn't moved up to PS5, what's your reason? Because a lot of them are very valid. And that's kind of sad to say as somebody that does love PlayStation. There's not that many games. There's not much reason. The benefit isn't notable. It's not like the jump between PS2 and PS3 or PS3 to PS4. Even PS3 to PS4 wasn't a huge jump in my eyes. But it's interesting looking back at previous console generations, like games that released at the beginning of the PS3 versus games that released at the end of the PS3 graphically looked like an entire different generation. Just on the same hardware, just because game developers got more used to the hardware and got more out of it. PS4, to some extent, similar thing. But I don't think we're going to see that happen with the PlayStation 5 because we're halfway through and we're still making games with 10-year-old hardware in mind. Anyway, that'll do. See you in a bit. Love you.